morning. It is early morning here in Denmark, and I am just taking a walk through the woods, going to get some breakfast. While I'm doing that, I wanted to talk to you guys about how you start out at a game, how I start out at a game. And this is sort of a process that's been building over time, and I hadn't really, when I started doing this, I didn't really think so much about it, but since we're training for the WTC and since all that teamwork started out, we've been sort of coaching each other, and we've thought a lot about what it is that actually happens when you approach a table, and when you look at the table and when you look at your opponent's lists. What is it? What are the questions that run through your mind, and how is it that you actually start out the game so that you optimize your chances of winning? And this is sort of my list of what happens in maybe the order. Oh, sorry, my eyes are simply running like crazy. In the order that it happens, not necessarily in the order that it's important. So typically, I would go up to a table and I would take the first look at the terrain. At that point, if I'm at a tournament, I will already have done a lot of other stuff before that. So I would have gone through the lists. I always read the lists, all the lists, before a tournament. I even take notes on the lists before a tournament. I have sort of developed a reputation for being very well prepared. Which I guess I am. I'm a school teacher, so preparation is one of the things that I'm comfortable with, right? So I prepare. I read all the lists. I take notes for the lists, and then I mostly forget everything once I go to the table. But before I go to the individual table, I'll have gone through all the tables at the tournament. I will have walked past every single table, preferably with one of my teammates, and just like given a few ideas about how to play on that table. Different missions, different scenarios that might work out to your benefit or that you should avoid. So that when I get to my individually assigned table, I will typically know a bit about that table beforehand. I'll typically know something about what is going to go on that table. And the first thing I'm looking at is that table beneficial to me or to my opponent? At this point, remember, if I'm at a tournament, I can't remember anything about my opponent's list. So I might have to look at my notes and all that. But I'll look at the table, I'll look at the terrain and decide, is this an open table or is this a table where there's a lot of line of sight blockers? For me, the line of sight blockers are the thing that really makes or breaks a game. Terrain, area terrain, fences and hedges and walls, all of that has its place. But for me, it's line of sight blockers. That is where the play is at. So I'm looking at those line of sight blockers. So I look at the terrain and then I go back. I'll shake hands with my opponent, say hi, and then I'll look at their list. They'll look at mine. We'll explain the lists to each other if that's necessary. Typically, it may not be, but it's kind of courteous to talk through the lists with each other, right? It's one of the things that I think you should do, especially if you're facing a newer player that may not know what it is you're doing, or they're doing, not, and what it is that your list is supposed to be doing. That was what I meant to say. So talking them through your list, giving them tips in advance. I often do that if I'm facing a new player, right? Stay away from that and be aware that this steward has 23 machine gun shots or whatever, just so they are aware of what is going on and what's going to happen. So, when I'm checking my opponent's list, good morning. We have joggers going through the woods. Good morning. When I'm checking through my opponent's list, the first thing is I sort of check out what's dangerous to my list. Is there anything here that is difficult for me to handle, or that can really mess up the important bits of my list? So I'm sort of checking out what is it that he has that I need to be wary of. Typically that's like one or two things that I need to check out, and then mentally make a note. I really need to check out where will he deploy that. What is he going to do with those assets that he has? So that I sort of revise, I go back to my original ideas when I first read his list. How's he going to play this? What is it that his list wants to do? Typically, lists have a sort of build type, where a lot of lists are sort of bring all comers lists, where they have a bit of everything. They have a bit of artillery, they have a bit of armor, they have a bit of transport, they have a bit of infantry, they have a bit of specialized anti-tank stuff. But not all lists are like that. Definitely not all. And if you look at maybe some of the top players, their lists will be very, very special. And very geared towards doing one thing, doing it well. So not that that's the best list build, it's just maybe what they enjoy doing, maybe. So I'm looking through his list and thinking, what is it that it wants to do? What does this list want to do? What is it good at? And how is it going to try and win? And that will inform me about what it is that I need to do to counter that. What is it that I need to do to win against this list? The final ideas that I often go through is, how is he going to try and deploy with this list? Is he bringing a lot of half tracks? He might deploy behind terrain so he can drive through that terrain. Is he bringing a lot of infantry where he maybe has LMGs or whatever? Then he needs line of sight that's long range so he can shoot at that range. Is he bringing artillery? Then he needs lots of open fields where he can spot me. Is he bringing multi-launchers? All of that. So where does he want to deploy? And especially I take notice of, where is it that he wants to deploy the stuff that is dangerous to my army? Where would he like to have that? Some instances you can even lure an opponent into placing their stuff, the assets that are dangerous. You can lure them into placing that in specific places where you want it to go, which is brilliant when you can get that to happen. Not always though. So that was my thoughts on the opponent's lists. Next up, then we talk through the terrain, and while we're doing that, we'll talk through specific things in the terrain, and I will be thinking the following questions. Where is the line of sight blockers? I've talked about those earlier, right? Where is the line of sight blockers that I want to use? And can I use them for anything beneficial? Are they just places to hide in my back line, or are they places where I can actually advance up board behind line of sight blockers? So I will be looking very closely at that, because that's something I want to use. We had brilliant examples of that at the last tournament I was at, the Danish Nationals, where some tables had very good line of sight blockers going through the middle. My game against Manuel, I had perfect line of sight blockers going up the middle, so I had houses that I could use to hide my stuff from his artillery in it. Brilliant. So that is something I'm looking at. I'm also looking at places where I should maybe not deploy, maybe not try and move into those places. Sorry, the sun is in my back. And that is areas where the opponent has the advantage. If he has more artillery than me, he has an advantage in the open areas, right? So I should maybe stay out of those open areas as much as possible. So that I'm looking at. And then I'm looking at where does my infantry, where do I want that to go? Typically, I will try not to spread out my infantry too much. I will try to keep them so that they can support each other centrally, more or less. But they still need to have places where they won't get shot up by machine guns or whatever. So where do I want my infantry to go? Where do I want to deploy them? And where do I want them to end the game? And how do I get from that place of deployment to where they need to end the game? And I do the same with my armor sections. These two sections are the most important. For the armor is where you can sort of push, you can attack, right? And the infantry is what wins the game. So these two parts of your army are the most important bits, to my mind at least.